Girl, you got that hot breath. Stop trying to lick in my mouth. You got that hot breath. Hi kids, welcome back to another pizza party. I'm Mrs. Pizza. That was Winnie, and Cheese is in her position, sitting on her throne, being the queen of the castle, per usual. It's really overcast outside. It's been like raining off and on again. That's not how that goes for quite some time now, and so I'm trying my best to like catch some light while it's happening. All right, why are we here? Well, I'm here to talk about fantasy romance, which is one of my favorite things. I don't know why you're here. Maybe because you like fantasy romance too? I hope so. If not, welcome anyways. Without further ado, let's talk about some fantasy romance. I tried to keep this more on the side of things that are still very popular among its readers, but not necessarily the biggest ones that everybody's heard of, the ones that even the people that don't read fantasy romance have read. You know which ones I'm talking about. You've already heard of those. You don't need me to tell you about those. I'm going to tell you about some different ones. We're going to put these into little categories so that you have an easier time picking through and seeing if any of these are something you would be interested in reading yourself. The first category we are going to talk about is the cozy ones, the cozy fantasy romance. And for this section, I have a whole series that I would definitely recommend, and that is the Falling for Fables series, which is by Jenna Wolfhart. The first book in this series is called Forged by Magic, and this is the story of Delea, who is an half-orc mercenary. She is under the power of the Ice King. He is a bad guy. We do not like the Ice King. He has embedded an ice chip into our main character, and he can make it explode at any time. If he's mad at her, kablooey, she's in bits. So she basically has to do his bidding. She is a prisoner. She does not want to be a mercenary, yet here she is being a mercenary. Well, the Ice King decides one day he's going to dangle her freedom in front of her, and he says, hey, go do this thing for me and I'll like set you free. So she heads off to find some sort of magical thing that may or may not exist. She ends up on these magical islands that are full of small towns, full of wonderful magical creature people, and she encounters a grumpy blacksmith who the two of them have this chemistry from the beginning. I feel like this one calls itself cozy because it has that small town setting. I feel like this is a little bit cozier in that way, but I don't feel like this is necessarily 100% cozy. But as this series went on, it got more and more kind of cozy, insular, small town, and that's why I recommend it. I definitely enjoyed this. Our blacksmith, Rivlin, however you would pronounce it in a fantasy world, is I believe he's like an elf or a fae. He's grumpy. He loves his small town and we're protected at all costs. And then we have our mercenary. He doesn't want to be a mercenary, but she does want to be free. So you have that kind of push and pull of different things. They both have secrets. They like each other. But we're all having all of this happen in a small fantasy town. The next book in this series, which is Brewed in Magic, follows our grumpy blacksmith sister. Her name is Lilia, and she owns a traveling tavern. So she has this tavern on a cart, and she goes from small town to small town on these islands when festivals and markets happen, and she provides, the drinks. She's a bar. She's a traveling bar. But on the way to the next festival market that she is going to serve her wares at, she encounters a man on the road. They have a very fantasy romance meet cute where her cart gets stuck and he helps her out of the mud. But when she gets to the next location, not only has he beaten her there, but he just happens to be the competition. This one is much cozier because we are trying to solve a mystery that's happening at the market. The market itself is our main setting. And so even though there are stakes happening, they're not giant stakes. They're not end of the world stakes. They are not worlds being conquered and evil king stakes. This one gets a lot more cozier and I enjoyed it. I thought it was really sweet. The next book in this series that should be coming out on May 17th, I believe, or at least that is the publishing date as of right now. And that one is going to be Mind and Magic. And this one is going to be following a dwarf who has some sort of magical I'm going to call it an obstacle. I don't know what it is because I haven't read the book. I've only read the synopsis, but she has something magical, a magical curse, something magical that is bad that has happened to her. And she is trying to lift this magical obstacle from her, and she's tried everything. Well, one day she gets entered into this competition that is happening in the mines, and the prize is some sort of magical relic that she believes might have the ability to lift this curse from her. Also entered into the competition is a shadow demon, and then when this magical relic that's supposed to be the prize goes missing, these two have to team up to find it. Chemistry happens. These are cute, easy to digest, cozy-ish fantasy. I really enjoy them. They're all available on Kindle Unlimited as of right now. You can fly right through them, and I don't feel like there's anything in it that's like incredibly upsetting or dark, even though there's bad things that happen along the way. These are cozy, and that you're going to feel like warm and cozy while reading them. There's a lot of describing the food and the festival and the magical creatures. They're easy to get through, and if you're looking for something that's just a good, easy time, cozy fantasy romance, I recommend. The next grouping for these next couple of books is going to be, do we even really like this guy? This is one of my actual favorite, I'm going to call it tropes within fantasy romance, where do we even really like the male main character in the beginning? Enemies to lovers, more rivals to lovers is one of my favorite tropes, and when it's done right, sometimes you're like, why? You do not like the guy in the beginning, and by the end, he has won you over. As he has won over his love interest as well. The first book that we're going to talk about is Bound to the Battle God, and this is by Ruby Dixon. You've probably heard of Ruby Dixon because she wrote the incredibly popular a few years ago Ice Planet Barbarians. Ruby Dixon writes a spicy book, and she has written so many books. I don't know how she does it. I really am honestly worried for her. I'm afraid that she's tied to a chair somewhere and just pumping out books. But she does have a way of making things funny and lighthearted even when they're dark, and her books are so spicy. Now, Bound to the Battle God, I believe I read somewhere, it took this author around a decade to write, and it is definitely one of her longest books. You can tell with this book that it was written over a long period of time, because even though the beginning is fun and fine, as the book goes on, the story gets better and better. And I was listening to this on audiobook, and I always tell people, when it got to the end, the very big climax of what's happening in this book, I could not function. I had my headphones on, I was staring at a wall, and I was just listening to this story unfold. I really enjoyed this. Let me tell you what it's about. This is the story of Faith, and she's just an everyday girl living her everyday life when one day she starts hearing drums on the other side of her apartment wall at weird hours, and there's not supposed to be anybody living in the apartment next door. So finally, one day, Faith has had enough. She thinks she's going absolutely bananas, and she has to prove to herself that she can hear these drums. So she breaks into the apartment next door and accidentally gets sucked into another world. Now, this world that she kind of gets catapulted into, it has its own set of rules. It's very fantasy heavy. In this world, the gods, every period of time, I forget what the period of time is, but they are dropped down onto the world and they have to fight it out. Well, in order to stay connected to the mortal plane, they are anchored to a mortal. Faith, through circumstances, ends up being tethered to our god of war named Aaron. And he's the worst. He's so arrogant. He's so full of himself. And Faith absolutely can't stand him. But she's trying to find a way back to where she came from. And he's got to find a way to survive this trial that the gods must go through. This is a fantasy adventure. We meet found family along the way. You learn about the world and the magic and how the gods work. It's so good. It's so good. And then it's got that Ruby Dixon spicy bits to it. I highly recommend this. I have not gone on with the series any farther than this. I have read some of the shorter stories, though. I have not continued the actual main storyline. Something you should know about Ruby Dixon is a lot of her book series then kind of branch off into connected series that you could read completely alone, but they also tie back to these main series. So I have read, I believe it's like Bound to the Spidae. There's a few other books. I'll put them on the screen. They're all shorter and they're totally fine, and they relate back to this, but don't necessarily need to be read for you to enjoy this. But if you really enjoy the story, these are the books that I read that continued on that I enjoyed as well. The other book in this section that we're going to talk about is going to be The Book of G, and this is by Lily Archer. This is one of those books that I completely picked up on a whim. I'm sure I saw it somewhere because when the cover popped up, I picked it up and I had a great time. But like the title of this section will say, you do not really like G in the beginning of this. See, you only really get G's point of view in this, and in the beginning, G is hearing some ethereal voice that is telling him some very murky message as he is waking up on a shoreline and he is badly, badly injured. He is washed up on this river's edge, just ripped to pieces. So, when he is saved by an old crone from the local small village who nurses him back to health, we get all of his internal monologue, and his insides don't necessarily match his outsides, but you get the feeling that they once did. G thinks he is the greatest. He just thinks he's the best. And even though now he's heavily scarred and has no memory of where he was before he washed up on the shore, he takes up on this adventure to try and figure out who he is and where he came from. In the beginning, I found G a little insufferable, but I laughed enough at what he said that I was along for the ride. By the end of it, you are just giggling at his nonsense, and he has become really endearing. And the love interest also feels the same. I think they actually started out like physically hating this person, and yet slowly G just kind of wears you down with his unbelievable ego. He just really thinks he's the greatest, and eventually you just kind of have to laugh and say, okay, G, you're kind of great. One of the magical things about this is that I read it not ever trying to figure out who G was, and then took the time later to like try and figure out who G was as a character, and that made the story that much better for me. I feel like you should maybe go into this not looking too far into who G is, but you'll probably figure it out in the fairy tale retelling fantasy romance type of way. The next section of our fantasy romances that we are going to talk about are the ones that I absolutely adore and may or may not have had me tearing up a little bit. We're going to call this section I Cried, but I Cry Easily, so do with that what you will. The first book we are going to talk about is Peaches and Honey, and this is by Raeta. This is available on Kindle Unlimited right now, and I believe the sequel to this is also available, but I have not picked it up yet. Don't worry, I will soon. This is the story of Anna, and I like to say that this story is kind of a soul sister to Addie LaRue. It's almost like the author of Addie LaRue, V.E. Schwab, and the author of this story were in the same creative writing class and got the same prompt and went in very different directions with it in a good way. I really, really loved this. See, Anna is this woman who has vitiligo, and she lives in ancient times. I swear it's like the 1200s or something, but I don't remember. A long time ago. And so, of course, back then, something like vitiligo was looked at as a curse or maybe something that was contagious instead of just skin. It's just skin. But back then, they didn't know any better. Everybody was a witch if they had like a weird freckle. So Anna has lived in seclusion, kind of tucked away from the rest of the village, barely scraping by. When one day, when she's out foraging, she encounters a beautiful woman that is running from a mob of villagers. And she takes this woman and helps her. And not only does she save this woman she doesn't know, but she offers this woman some of the small, meager things that she has as far as food. Well, it just so happens that this woman is a god. And in this charity / just true compassion that Anna has, she sees what a good person Anna is deep inside her. And so she offers Anna a gift that then gives Anna immortality. Now, it doesn't necessarily give her powers. It just makes it so she doesn't age and she doesn't die. And then we follow Anna through centuries. In the beginning, figuring out how to survive as a woman on her own, and she has to move around quite frequently because a woman who never ages definitely would start to be something that the locals would pick up on, so she has to leave before anybody ever starts to realize she's not getting any older. She also, because of this, can't really connect with people because she can't tell them who she is or that she doesn't die, and so the loneliness of time time, but also the superpower that is time. She spends so much time learning about things that she then can see patterns in history. She brushes up against a lot of historical events. It's really quite interesting how the story weaves itself around. And the entire time she's dealing with this shifter god who she kind of has a slow burn romantic relationship with. Now, here's what I will say. If you need your fantasy romance to be spicy, a la Ruby Dixon, this probably won't be for you. This is a much more slow burn emotional connection that is happening. We are just following Anna through centuries. I adored this. I was so invested. And if you like The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, but you wish you got more time weaving through the centuries with that character, pick up this book. Pick up this book. It was so good. The next book we are going to talk about is one of my absolute favorite books, and I feel like I bring this up every single time I'm talking about books. If I can squeeze this book into any conversation, I make it happen. And that is Swordheart by T. Kingfisher. This is just so stinking good. This is by far my favorite of all of this author's fantasy romance books, and I've read a lot of them, but this one is the absolute top tier from this author. This is funny, it's sweet, it's found family, it's got moments that make you teary-eyed. I almost said teary up, and that doesn't make any sense. But it's so stinking good. This is absolutely a cozy fantasy, in my opinion, in that the stakes aren't necessarily super duper high, but I decided to put it in here with these because it has all of my heart. This is the story of Hala, and she is a housekeeper. And she has worked as a housekeeper for her uncle by marriage for many years. He's a very eclectic older man, and when he passes away, he wills all of his wealth to Hala. Well, his family is not having it. They absolutely hate this idea, and they're not very nice people. And so they are trying to coerce Hala into marrying another member of the family so they can keep the wealth all to themselves. Hala's not having this. She doesn't want to marry this gross guy with clammy hands that they're trying to pawn off on her. And so they lock her in a room. And in a moment of desperation, Hala unsheaths a sword that is in this room with her because this eclectic uncle of hers collected all kinds of oddities. And when she unsheaths this sword, a man pops out, and like a genie in a bottle, he is tethered to the sword. His name is Sarkis, and he's the servant of the sword, and he is now Hala's protector. And they go on an adventure to save Hala from these awful people. This is so stinking funny. Hala is hilarious. Sarkis is grumpy and the best. And we also meet other characters that become our found family along the way. One of the things I think I love the best about Hala is that she has unintentionally learned to weaponize a lot of things that have been used against her. She is seen as a stupid woman, and she uses this dizzying speech to confuse people around her because, in her own words, people don't hurt stupid women, they kick them to the side. And so she has found a way to work the system that has always kind of kept her down. But it is hilarious to go down these wild trains of thought with Hala when she's getting flustered and trying to confuse someone. She's like unintentionally a genius. Sarkis is scarred and grumpy and has lived through many battles, and chemistry starts to happen between him and Hala pretty quickly, even though he's really trying to deny it. This is my favorite fantasy romance. This is a book that I have now reread on several occasions, and I absolutely love it, and I'm just going to keep rereading it. The audiobook for this is so stinking good, and I highly recommend it if you're looking for an audiobook. I laugh out loud every time I listen to it like a complete nut job, just walking around with headphones and giggling to myself. The next book that we're putting in this section is going to be Entreat Me by Grace Draven. I love Grace Draven books, and if you have never heard of Grace Draven, I highly recommend checking her backlist for something that tickles your fancy. Maybe it'll be this one. See, Entreat Me is Grace Draven's Beauty and the Beast retelling, and I am a sucker for Beauty and the Beast retellings. I don't know what it is, but I literally cannot say no to them. But there's a really fun spin on this one. See, this is the story of Levain, and she is the older sister of the most beautiful girl in town. And Levain has been previously married and had a decent and happy relationship with her husband, but she is now widowed. Levain's father, who runs this business, I think it's like a shipping business, is very careless with money and just seems to constantly be getting getting into trouble that Levane has to clean up. And Levane's younger sister is her number one priority. She wants her sister to be married well and taken care of. Levane loves her sister. And Levane's sister, being beautiful and young and flighty, meets a beautiful young man and runs off with him. Levane's not having this. Absolutely not. She has worked too hard. She's tired of cleaning up everybody's messes. And so she treks after her sister to this great, big, beautiful estate where her sister has run off to. And that's where she meets the father of her sister's super dreamy boyfriend, and he has been cursed, and he is our beast character. Levane is prickly and strong-headed and strong-willed and just so over everyone just getting to do whatever damn thing they feel like. She is just tired of cleaning up messes. And I feel it, Levane. I feel it. She is really in an interesting position as well because she's widowed. So she's not some like fainting maiden who hasn't seen the world. She knows what's up. She's done a lot. And so when her and this attraction to the father character starts to build, because she's a widow in this world, she's given a few more liberties, but she's also there to make sure that her younger sister isn't taken advantage of. And this is a really interesting dynamic because we have the people that would usually be the main characters in the story, the beautiful sister, the beautiful sister's beautiful boyfriend. They are there, but they are not our main focus. Levane and our beast character are. I really, really enjoyed this. I enjoy how great Draven makes her fantasy romances feel very folklore fantasy. She has this like fairy tale quality to her writing, which I have found in every book I've picked up from her, from this author, I should say. It's been that fairy tale feel to it, that real fantastical, magical fantasy romance. There's a lot of thought put into the backstory, the world, the magic in these. And if you're looking for something a little bit more fairy tale fantasy romance, any Grace Draven, but if you like Beauty and the Beast retellings, Entreat Me is definitely a good one. The next category, we're going to call the whole damn thing. So I have 2 fantasy romance series that I usually recommend the entire series to anybody who'll listen. I like to think of like when you give someone a TV show that has a bunch of seasons and they're so excited to binge it. This is similar. I'm giving you a full series, or at least a series that has several books in it, so you've got books to binge. And what could be better than that? The first one we're going to talk about is the Boundland series, and this is by Elsie Winters. I believe some of these books are available on Kindle Unlimited, but not all of them. I know there is a novella from this author that is also included in the Boundland series that is not available on Kindle Unlimited, but I think all of the other books are. And as far as I can tell, the series has kind of been completed for the most part. We've gotten a book from everybody in our friend group is how we'll put it. So if anything else happens in this series, it'll probably be an offshoot. The first book in this series is Leviathan Song, and this one is really, really sweet. See, these are more urban fantasy romances, and in this story, we have Alara, and I believe she's half fae, or maybe she's got to be half fae. She's half fae, and I believe she lives in Seattle. And in this world, all of the normal human cities exist, but they have these things that are portals, and they can take you to different magical fantasy cities as well. Now, if you are a full-blooded magic person, you cannot go into the human world. I forget what they call it, but they have a word for the world that does not exist with magic. If you are human or half fae or half magical, you can usually travel between the two. You can be in the human world, but you can also travel through these portals to go to fantasy locations. Now, Alara lives in Seattle, and she owns a shop where she imbues objects with magical powers. Magical jewelry, talisman. She has a really interesting power. She can make magical trinkets, but it's much more important and powerful than that. She has a very interesting skill. She runs this shop with her best friend, and she is unfortunately noticed by the wrong kind of people who want something from her. Now, also at the same time, one day when walking around, Alara encounters Levi, and Levi is also a magical creature. He is a siren, and his voice and his song has effects on people. These two end up kind of tumbling into an adventure, basically trying to keep Alara safe from these people that have found out what she does and they want her services. This is really sweet. I really enjoyed it. I had a great time with the world and the magic. There's also no third act breakup in this story, and if you are like me and sometimes you just hate a damn third act breakup, this one's a lot of fun, and you don't have to worry about that stupid third act conflict being a breakup. We move on to the second book, which is Magpies Mayhem, and we are following Alara's best friend, whose name is Sydney, and she is a magpie shifter. Sometimes she's a lady, and sometimes she's a magpie. And she is chaos incarnate. She is just so much fun and absolutely hilarious. And she comes from a family of shifters who are also just chaos incarnate. And since she was a very young girl, she's had a crush on Jordan. Now, Jordan was friends with one of her older brothers when she was young. And so just imagine Sydney braces and knock-kneed, just in her awkward stage, watching Jordan play soccer from the sidelines. She was absolutely enamored, and he really didn't know she existed. She was a little kid's sister, but she's always had a thing for him. Well, Jordan just happens to be one of Levi's roommates, and so Sydney and Jordan are accidentally brought back together on this collision course, and childhood crushes die hard. But the thing I will say about this is that Jordan is not looking to fall in love. He is not looking for a relationship. He is not looking for connections in general, and he has a real problem with connections. He has his friendships, but they've seemed to worm their way into his heart. And Sydney is just absolute chaos and blows all his walls down, and there's nothing Jordan can do about it. She's coming in. She is a wrecking ball, and she is just tearing down the infrastructure. This is really sweet and fun. There just happens to be a baby dragon in the story. And this one, again, is more urban fantasy. The third book in this series, which is much more like traditional fantasy setting than the others, even though we are now working with the third roommate, Levi Jordan, and we now have Grim, also known as Victor, who is a Grim Reaper. And he is summoned back home when he is told by the matriarch of the family, which is his grandmother, that it's time for him to get married. Let me back up and tell you, because this story has the absolute best title of the three, and honestly could go as best title for a fantasy romance I've ever heard of. And that is Seduction of a Psychopomp, Erogenous Handholding, and Other Ways to Tame Your Reaper. Victor, aka Grim, is married off to Celeste because Victor's magic will help Celeste stay alive. She's a fae and has fallen ill, and even though they've tried everything under the sun to heal her, she's just not getting any better. And so in order for her to stay alive, she has to get married to Victor. And he goes into this with all this chivalry and just wants to make sure that Celeste is taken care of, that she is healthy and happy, and does not want to push any agenda on her, where Celeste is getting so stinking frustrated because she just wants this guy to make a move. It's really sweet. They're both very sweet characters, and that's kind of refreshing instead of having your grumpy and your sunshine, which is usually where they go with these. Instead, we have these two people that are very sweet and reserved and a little bit shy, trying to dance around each other and figure out how to show the other one that they're interested. I really, really enjoy this series. I really think if any of those books sounded like a good time, you should pick it up. It's a lot of fun, and I'd like to hear more people talking about it. And the last series that we're going to talk about, because again, I have to shoehorn this series into absolutely every conversation, is going to be the Mishab series by Kimberly Lemming. Do I talk about this author in every single video I have? Maybe. I don't know. Probably. I try to. The first book in the series is That Time I Got Drunk and Saved a Demon, and this is absolutely hilarious. This entire series is absolutely hilarious and extremely spicy. This is the story of Sin, and she is a spice farmer, and she's having a great time living her life. She has no aspirations of adventure. She likes hanging out with her best friend, eating cheese, drinking in town, being a farmer. She loves her family. She's got a great life. Well, one day when she's stumbling home from town a little intoxicated after a festival, she sees someone in trouble, and when she goes to help them, she accidentally saves a demon. Now, the demon in question's name is Fallon, and he kind of ropes Cinnamon into going on a great big adventure, and then steamy things happen. This is a lot of fun, and even though I love this series so much, and I think this book is definitely worth reading, this is actually my least favorite book in the entire series, which I gave this one 4 stars, so that should say something. The next book in the series follows Cinnamon's best friend, Bree, who's a cheesemaker. And Bree, one day, day, when she is at a festival in town, maybe celebrating the ending of the first book with Cinnamon and Fallon, she is approached by someone who tries to dose her. They try and give her a love potion. But instead of drinking the love potion, she chucks it at the head of the guy trying to give it to her. He ducks at the last minute, and she accidentally hits a werewolf with a love potion. Hence the title, That Time I Got Drunk and Yeeted a Love Potion at a Werewolf. So the person, obviously, that got hit by the love potion is a werewolf named Felix, and he is instantly enamored with Bree, but Bree's in a tough spot because she doesn't understand how consent would work if you've been hit by a love potion. You are under the influence of something that is hijacking your feelings. How can you say yes to making out with somebody if you're under the influence of a love potion? So she's very conflicted when Felix tells her that she is his fated mate. Bree is hilarious. Felix is adorable. And this gets spicy fast. And we are reintroduced. There is a novella that actually introduces us to a character named Alexis, but this is the first main book in the series that introduces Alexis, our sentient sword. That's right. We have a sword that talks, and she's highly inappropriate and hilarious. And I adore her. Things are happening in the small town where Bree and Felix are, and a mystery is unraveling as Bree and Felix are trying to figure out if they like each other or if one of them is under the influence of a love potion. And the last book in the series, which I will, spoiler warning, inform you, is my favorite. But I don't know if it's my favorite because it's the best, or it's my favorite just because Kimberly Lemming got in her stride. We know the world, we know the creatures, and so now she can just be hilarious and give us sexy, funny times with demons. Because in this world, demons can be anything, obviously. They can be werewolves, they can be nagas, they can be orcs, they could be anything. My favorite book in the series, That Time I Got Drunk and Saved a Human. This is the story of Dante, who we meet in our first book, and he is leaving the small town where these stories take place on his search for his fated mate when he encounters a young woman who has been locked in a tower by a dragon, and he may or may not be dosed by her because she doesn't realize that he would have helped her out even if she hadn't drugged him. I can't really tell you much more about her because it would be spoilers for some of the other books, but just know this one is kind of a marriage of convenience story, but more of a oops, we accidentally mate bonded, but we probably should have mate bonded to begin with because we're really compatible. This one's hilarious. We also have things happening in the world that we have to solve mysteries, survive battles, but it's still so funny and so fun. And there's characters introduced in all these books that I hope at least get short story novellas where we can find out. Wallabash and Sunbeam, if they don't get their story, I will riot. If you haven't read the books, you don't understand. But there's lots of creatures that are introduced that you absolutely love and you just want to see their happily ever afters as well. I think there's 5 books planned, but since this author has had these books picked up by a publisher, I don't know if that's still the plan or if that was the original plan or if that's just a rumor that I heard on the internet that I think is true because it would make me happy if it was. But this series makes me incredibly happy. It's hilarious. It's just stinking spicy and a great good time. And if I could find another series that gives me these vibes, I would be a happy girl. But that, kids, is where we are going to end all of these recs. I feel like I've been talking for a minute. Cheese has finally come to check out the stack of books on the floor. If you have any fantasy romance recs that aren't, the same old ones, but something that you absolutely loved and you think that I would enjoy, please let me know, especially if it's something funny. I love a funny fantasy romance. The fantasy rom-com is just top tier for me. But I hope you're reading good books out there, wherever you are. If you had fun hanging out with me and the dogs, please subscribe, and I'll see you next time.